Do you ever wonder what the world between worlds is like? Can we access wisdom and healing from that place? Today, I'm delighted to speak with Kelley Harrell about that very thing. Kelley Harrell is the author of Gift of Dreamtime, Awakening to the Divinity of Trauma. She's a modern shaman, intuitive, and death walker who is based in North Carolina and has an international clientele. She holds a master's in religious studies and is an ordained interfaith minister. Her work is nature-based and is focused through the lenses of animism, Sather, and Druidry. She works closely with the elder Futhak roots and divine nature spirits of Eastern North Carolina. If you like what she has to say, you can find her at kelleyharrell.com. And of course, that link is in the show notes. Before we talk to Kelley, let's give gratitude to the elements that form all creation. I give thanks to the earth for the firm foundation beneath our feet, for our homes, the food that you provide, the bodies that allow us to live sensuous experiences, and for the beauty that surrounds us. I give thanks to the wind that carries the voices of our ancestors across the veil, for our ability to create, communicate, and connect. Thank you. I thank the fire for igniting our passion and giving rise to the action that brings new things to life. I thank you for our power and the responsibility to wield that power well. Thank you. I give thanks to water for helping us to flow so that we don't get too attached or stuck in things whose time has come and gone. Thank you, water, for giving us the emotions to make our experiences meaningful. I give thanks to our fellow divine earthlings, the plants, animals, and mineral kingdom. We are you, you are us. Let us never forget that connection and honor it always. Thank you. And thank all of you for being here and continuing to support the channel. If you haven't yet subscribed or reviewed the channel, that's a way to support. So please do that. And now let's welcome Kelley Harrell. Thanks for being here.
So when I picked up your book, The Gift of Dreamtime, I thought it was about dreams. I thought we were going to have a talk about dreams. And then I read it and found out, no, that's not what it is. So can you tell us what is the Dreamtime?
Well, yes and no. That word was spoken to me very early in my experiences of soul travel, that it was kind of the experience of being able to walk out and experience what that bigger cosmology is and what it has to offer and how it's in relationship with how we live every day. But what I didn't know at the time is that that is an Australian Aboriginal term that means something very specific for their experience of spiritual relationship. So that is a big distinction to make.
Okay. This is the first time I have ever read anything like this. And I went into it totally blind. I had no idea what I was walking into. And I thought it was so beautifully done. I thought it was such a well captured way of looking at that space and the way that things work there. I mean, who knows how other people perceive things, but I think that for me, it was almost as if it was like, oh my God, someone else has been there. They see what it's like. Because it's so hard to talk about. It's not like here. And one of the first things that hit me in the book was when you met your spirit animal, the owl, and you say, he's waiting for me to ask for help. So do you think that that's necessary, or do our guides help us anyway?
I think there's a combination of things happening there, but my experience more often than not is that we have to ask, or rather maybe give permission for them to be involved. And that's partly so that they don't usurp our free will, partly so that they understand what we really need and so that we understand what we really need. Because if we can articulate it, then we can accept whatever support and help we're given. But I think a lot of times, if we aren't really clear on what our needs are, we know what the problem is. We aren't necessarily clear on what our needs are. then we don't necessarily recognize when we are being helped and supported. That's a tough one because I think they can intervene without our express permission, but I'm not sure that it's the way that they want it to be. They need us involved. We
I
can't just
agree.
sit back and wait for them to do everything. And I encounter that a lot. I
Yeah.
encounter it a lot in spiritual, kind of general spiritual culture. This idea that they just kind of Shazam everything for us and we just let it happen. But there's not much accountability in that.
Yeah. And I think it's true in therapy too, because if I'm trying to help somebody who just wants to wallow in it, it's not really going to work. So I do wait for them to be ready and to want it. I don't just be like, well, this is what you got to do,
Yeah.
because what's the point?
I think that's a cultural dilemma because we're not that mature. I mean, we're not in American settler culture. We have not understood yet that we have to be active.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I think it comes from you just take a pill and you're going to feel better.
I wish.
Yeah. It doesn't
I
really work
wish.
that way. So one of the other things, or maybe it's the same thing, that really leapt out to me about the book was the way that you talked about, and this is my perception, but I think I have it objectively, um, is that you were seeing through your perspective, through the eyes of your guides, through your past selves, through the creatures that you conjured, and this is multifaceted sense of awareness or knowing. And I imagine that that would be like so overwhelming because we're kind of linear. We see one thing at a time and it's not. I mean, I think everything is connected and everything is available at all times, but we have this one perspective. So, how were you able to embody that without going crazy?
Well, let's have a conversation both ways about that because the source of the book is trauma. And it changed my brain. Like it changed
Oh,
my brain in ways that I could not fully understand until probably I had to be a professional to some capacity. Like I had to be productive. I had to get with the program and be productive. And that's when I realized that the way my brain works is not congruent with the demands that this culture places on us,
oh,
spiritually or otherwise.
mm-hmm.
So, I mean, that's my question to you as well. Like, you know, trauma changes your brain and it makes it flexible in ways that maybe it wouldn't have been before. I can't say because my trauma happened so young, my brain was still forming, but I really do think that has a lot to do with my nonlinearness.
That's really interesting because I work with trauma survivors. And what I have noticed is that when your trauma happens really young, it is very different. And I think part of that is because the uh, prefrontal cortex, so the thinking part, the language part, isn't online yet. And so the way that you perceive reality isn't the way that an adult would now. I mean, memories in everything. It's in your taste, in your smells, in your it's totally different. So maybe it preserves that a bit.
I think so. I mean, when I hear you say that, my body's like, yes.
So what's it like to perceive in that way as an adult in a world that doesn't have any idea what you're talking about?
It's heartbreaking and lonely. And I get to meet a lot of heartbroken and lonely people doing what I
That makes
do.
sense. That
I
makes
mean,
sense.
I get to meet a lot of people who actually have their own version of that.
Mm-hmm.
And I find the more that I have the conversation about animism, the more people I meet who are like, yes, I don't, none of us encounter enough people having that conversation, but there are more and more. And I feel like that's part of it. When you start to realize, trauma or not, when you start to realize that you are nature and that there is a conversation happening within that all the time, I think you get a little less linear. And the fact that maybe we don't know where nature is its own original trauma.
Okay. And I'm wondering too, when I picked up the book, like I said, I've never read anything like it. Um, I don't know if you can answer this, but do you think so? I'm not the average mainstream person. I grew up in animism, and when I read it, to me, it was like, oh my God, this is reality. You know, the way that I see reality, and I don't think other people do. So when a mainstream person picks up your book, do they get it, or do you have to have some sort of background in order to understand what you're reading?
I think so. The book is 20 years old this
Yeah.
year.
Hmm.
I don't remember. Was September? Honestly don't remember. But the majority of people who have connected with me around that book, that was my first book. And the majority of people who have connected with me connected around the trauma part.
Oh, got
And
it.
they connected around having validation that that dissociative tendency can be functional. I mean, not just as a means of immediate protection, especially as a child, but even as an adult, the capability to step into that kind of imagination and learn who you and the world are from that vantage point. I think that's the thing that resonated most. People who were already connected to spirit worker, sort of soul travel kind of experience, expressed feeling really validated.
Okay.
And I had a couple of people really upset that I didn't like have these bookends of here's what I was doing that day when I had that experience of spirit walk. And I'm like, I did it that way on purpose. Like that was the whole point, was not doing it that way, was emphasizing what happened in soul travel, or the potential of what can happen in soul travel, because nobody had ever done that before. I'm not sure that they haven't done that before, but they market it as fiction.
Oh, okay. Okay. But I think if you don't have a sense of reality that's not totally masculine and linear and coming from the thinking brain, then you're not really fully here.
Hmm.
And it's hard to talk about that for me. I don't have the language for that because it's not logical linear. It's not in the language part. And so I really like having this as a resource to show people like this is what it's like. You know, this is what it's like to have a full brained experience of reality. And
I've
so
waited
I
20
love
years
it.
to hear somebody say that. Seriously, I really have. Thank you.
Yeah, I hope that people will explore that because I think that's kind of how I work in trauma. And people are like, what are you doing? And we just take the language out of it, and I can't explain it, but it really does help to get to the root of things because you're not thinking about it. You're in your body, you're having an experience, it's fully sensory. And you did a beautiful job with that with the language. I don't know how you did that, but it was great.
I appreciate how you say you're having this full sensory embodied experience that is still very other. Because, the Instagram influencer world of embodiment is very like, you must be here, you must feel your bottom in the chair. And it's not, that is not embodiment to me. That will take me out
Mm.
of my body. And I don't think we talk enough about, I don't know, is that neurodivergence? Are there different ways to be embodied? I tend to think so.
Yeah. Do you think that when I was reading this, so I'm a trauma therapist. I've been doing this for over 20 years, and the non-talking part has really come into its own recently, but I haven't really seen it done in the way that you do in your book. So there was no therapist. It's just you having your experience of your life with your spirit helpers. Do you think that it is necessary to have that holistic, meaning that spirit piece in there to truly heal from trauma?
Know that I can project what it should be like for other people. I know that for me, I needed to have the mental piece that is mindfulness and therapy, and I needed to have the holistic, spiritual, energetic piece. My inclination is to say that the medicine is in the poison, which
Yeah.
nobody really wants to hear, but the way that it was inflicted is what you have to walk straight to. It's like the way that it was inflicted is the modality that is the medicine. And so if your wound is at a mental and emotional level, then you have to address it from that standpoint. If your wound is spiritual and energetic, you have to also address it from that standpoint. And when we're talking about trauma in childhood, and maybe always, it's going to be all of the above.
I agree. Yeah. Yeah. So I work with a lot of people who tell me, oh, this happened and I'm over it. I worked through that. And you go to the body and it is still there. That energy is still there. It is still in your soul.
I think that's the part I've struggled with the most, and most recently, partly at my age, is how the body has internalized
Yeah.
trauma.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. One of the other things that you said in the book that I thought was really interesting, because it is spiritual, but it's not of a sect. I mean, you couldn't put your name on it and say, okay, well, this is Buddhist, this is Jewish, this is love, but I think it was one of your guides that said that there's no such thing as indifference. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, that's one of those lines. There are a few from that book that to this day I just stop what I'm doing. They strike me all over again, and that is one of them. And I remember when he said that, and my feeling was, we are all made of lore. We are all made of stories, and the stories don't go away, but they are shaped continuously by ourselves, by the experiences we continue to have in the world around us and in the worlds within us. And in that respect, we're not indifferent. We're not indifferent about anything ever.
Yeah, I think it's Buddhism that talks about, being kind of detached and indifferent. And it's just a different way of looking at things. Yeah.
And I do think there's a difference between saying there's no such thing as indifference and absolute emotional involvement. Like having that capacity because you've done mindfulness work, because you've done different levels of soul and energetic work, to be able to behold the thing and understand that you're in relationship with
Yeah.
the thing,
Mm-hmm.
but you are allowed to change how you're in relationship with it over
Mm-hmm.
and over.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's the key. One of the keys to being alive is realizing that it is a relationship and engaging in that relationship and making conscious choices about how you want to show up in that. Yeah. And another aspect of that is, so when you're in the dream time, everything is metaphorical, it's symbolic, and it's real. And I think when I'm doing work like that, it's real easy to see the shadow.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's also easy to heal the shadow if that's what it needs, because it becomes kind of absurd.
Yeah, that's a good
And
way to put it.
so I'm wondering, is it like that for you as well?
It is. I think that's a really good way to put it. I don't advocate this for everybody, but my methodology, particularly in my youth, was always about confrontation. Like as soon as I could discern the thing, I would walk straight up to it and have a conversation. I would invite it as a being, as its own spiritual manifestation, and literally invite it to sit down and talk with me. And it's cathartic on so many levels to just be able to have that awareness and capacity to listen and observe and also react where needed, to blow up or to sing to it and help you feel better and it feel better. Like it just brings so many things to the fore. It helps me to know exactly what I'm dealing with. And kind of like what we were saying before, it puts me in the place of where the hurt happened. Like we're looking right at each other. We're there. And I know there are words for that approach to therapy in the therapy world.
Yeah.
But that kind of confrontation for me has always been incredibly beneficial. I have yet to meet a shadow aspect that we didn't both walk away educated and allies. It doesn't mean we're buds and that we agree about everything, but we came away allies, and that's what I needed.
Mm-hmm. Any tips for how to do that safely?
I think it starts with realizing that your shadows are hurt.
Yeah.
I mean, that's in when I teach shadow tending to students, that's where we start. To take the sting out of it right away and understand that this is an aspect of you that is hurting. It was hurt by something. There was an experience in life, probably most of the time in childhood, but not always, where you literally did not have the skills or capacity to respond the way that you really needed to. And so you did what you had to do. And that's what makes shadow parts form to start with. And so being able to realize that and potentially revisit it, we can walk back in time. We are adults. We have skills, we have experience. We can walk back to that child part and say, I know that you didn't have what you needed at the time, but I have it now. I'm grown. I have that skill set now. And maybe even let them see your life now. Let them look around and see what your life is like, and then ask them what they need and give it.
Okay. How do soul agreements work?
I don't know. Ooh, I do not know. Isn't that the question? Like, because I don't know that there's one answer to that. I what I imagine and what I sometimes experience is that we come in the way that I imagine our allies always are. We come in detached and aware, and we have a game plan and we know what it is. And we have that sort of objectivity that allies have. And then we pass through whatever that barrier is, and it all goes to shit. Like all of that wonderful, beautiful objectivity goes out the window. But to pick up the whole From Elder to Ancestor book, the lack of elders is part of why that speed bump is so nasty. Like, I think it's a hard speed bump. It's a hard experience to go from like being merged with oneness and all consciousness down to this, and being born into whatever your ancestral lineage stuff is that has amassed up to this point. And then you have to figure out how to like do the thing that you came here to do and also manage the way life really is here. And that's where being in form is so different than being out of form, than being mere soul. Like, we have to deal with a lot more stuff that we weren't aware. We didn't know the details.
Yeah.
We just kind of had the outline when we got here. And then when we get the details, it can so easily throw you off your game. We forget what our agreements were, maybe good or bad agreements. We forget what they were. And we spend so much time just trying to get back to that, dealing with the minutia of how hard it is to be here, if only we had elders that held that space for us and
Yeah.
whispered what they've learned and what they know about the other side. That's it. The core yearning to me, that dynamic of what were the agreements that we made. Remember, I'm supposed to be doing something, but I'm not sure how to pay for the bills.
Right. But I think every trauma survivor wants to know why, though. Why did this horrific thing happen? Especially, why did it happen to me? And in my work with past life regression clients, sometimes they get that answer because you have the opportunity to talk and you see it through the perspective is a bit different, so it lands in a way that you can receive it. And you got that in the book.
Yes, and it has continued to be informed. Like, it's dialed in literally just this year, like the 20-year mark. Magic, I guess. But I had the opportunity to go to Scotland and England over the spring. I had real trepidation about going to England. I'm like, I don't want to go to the mothership. But there were things that happened for me there by being on that land that could not have happened here. There was healing. There were soul conversations. There were spontaneous visions. And I learned more about lineage trauma that contributed to the trauma that I had in childhood. I'm still processing that.
Yeah, I think the land matters so much. I think your ancestors matter so much.
I agree.
Yeah.
I've heard a lot of people say different land offers you different memories.
Yes.
It's oriented in a way that it can facilitate certain things to happen. And I believe that. I've traveled to different places. I believe that. But I have not traveled there, like to the mothership. I have not been to the land of colonization before. And standing there was like just constant purging, constant processing, constant visions. And I couldn't process it on that land. Because I was like, how do I come home? How do I come back to this ecosystem that has held me and cherished me? And I feel so attached to Scotland now. I didn't expect that at all. But when I came home, I was like, you can't process this there. It won't let you. You have to, you do it here. That's our specialty. That's our relationship.
Do you think those experiences are necessary?
I do.
Yeah.
I do. And I was really privileged to have it. I did not like it, but I was really privileged to have it. And it makes me think of how many people will not get to stand in the places that they need to stand for healing.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things people don't understand is that it's not always nice.
Well, again, you tell me. There's something about hitting that point when you have these like spiritual emergencies. You are blown open. Who you were is not who you are, and you don't know who you're going to be because that's not here yet. And you have to live. You have to function within that, and you don't have all the pieces and parts to do it. It's not quick. It's not gentle. And there's an insanity that sets in. I'm saying that very specifically for myself. There's a point in those kinds of moments where I'm like, am I possessed? Am I okay? Am I insane? Am I having a psychotic break? Maybe all of those, maybe none of those. I don't know. But at least at this point in my life, in my age, in my healing, I guess, that's the turning point. When I start asking those questions is when I have crested some amazing darkness. I don't know that at the time, even though it happens over and over. But when I can start asking those questions is when I'm like, okay, now we're getting somewhere.
Yeah. I'm glad you said that because a lot of people do have those questions and they're afraid to to bring them out. Like if I say this, it's going to make it true, but I think it's totally normal.
Sometimes what registers as healing feels opposite of that.
Yeah.
And I think too, I see this in myself. I've seen it in many clients and students. The stuff that we arrive at the spirit worker with is not why we're coming to the spirit worker. It's not the reason that we're there. And once we start really chipping away, like, we resolve the surface stuff and we start getting down to that deeper stuff, that's where I am. Like I'm not at the surface level stuff anymore. And there is still going to be stuff.
Yeah. Always. Yeah. So how does having a relationship with the non-physical world help us to deal with the harshness of living in the physical world?
What a day to ask that question, huh? My experience is our unresolved stuff is its own life force. It is not you. It is not the experience. The unresolvedness becomes its own being and energy. And when we don't deal with that, it lives on. Even if we are long gone, even if we are dead and gone, our crap still lives here and it still provokes everybody. Like systems, places, family, community, it still pokes us, and we have to reconcile that. It is imperative that we die well, because we pollute not just here, but we pollute the spirit realm when we don't die well.
Yeah. I hadn't heard it put that way, but yes. Yes.
And that's what we're living right now. We have so many unquiet dead.
Do you think the Dreamtime is within the matrix or a simulation, or do you think that's separate or non-existent?
I don't know. And maybe all of that. Or maybe something we haven't figured out, haven't thought of. I don't know. We could sit with that for a while.
And your book is it's not totally about incest and surviving that, but I wanted to give you an opportunity to, if there's something that you would like to say to victims of sexual assault, what would that be?
Oh, so many things. I think the biggest thing is you are still here for a calling that may or may not have anything to do with the experience that you had. I don't know. And that's your gift. That calling is your gift. You're still here for that. There is support that can help you manifest that, no matter what you perceive your limitations are. I think that's been the most challenging for me as a survivor, an adult survivor of childhood incest, is thinking that it's just constantly a limitation.
Yeah.
Like it is these layers of like, I thought I did that. I thought we had that conversation. But that's the journey. That's the hallmarks of healing. And I just saying this, I've had a lot of catharsis about this year. It happens with any book, any art, any offering of yourself that you put forward in a way to the world. It becomes its own life force. It generates attention that you may not want. And that has been challenging about Gift of the Dreamtime, even though the majority, vast, 98% of people were wonderfully supportive and thoughtful about me and the book and its experience. Having that many people holding it in their container was stressful in its own way, in its own energetic way. There's like a poke that comes with putting things out into the world like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Kelley, thanks so much for being here. I loved your book, and I appreciate everything that you're doing to help everyone and for sharing your story. I highly recommend everybody read it. It is 20 years old. I just got around to reading it, but I still think, read it.
Thank you. And thank you so much for the work you do.
Well, sure. Thanks. And thanks everybody for being here, and we'll see you next week.